Welcome back to Brock's Hammer, everybody, and today we're going to be diving into one of the most common weapon comparisons in the Eldar Codex, and of course I'm talking about the Shuriken Cannon and the Scatter Laser. So, which to choose, right? They're both anti-infantry weapons, and to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a hard choice to decide which one to take in most cases. Unless, of course, you're running Hail of Doom, it's a very close call. And especially as of lately, I've come around to one of these options as the superior pick for most lists. So let's get right into it. And a quick overview before we begin, we're going to be taking a quick look at both the Scatter Laser and Shuriken Cannon profiles. We're going to be looking at the math behind each weapon against mech and tech enemies. So mech, of course, is Marine equivalent, and tech, of course, is Terminator equivalent enemies. We're going to be looking at the math behind that. And we're going to be talking about which weapon, in my opinion, comes out on top, not only based on the math, but on different matchups. So taking a look at the Shuriken Cannon has a medium range of 24 inches, heavy 3, with strength 6, AP -1, and damage 2, which is pretty good. And right off the bat, it has the Shuriken special rule, which means it gets additional AP if you roll a 6 to wound. So just looking at this weapon, you can tell it's a general purpose weapon meant for dealing with heavier infantry, but not too heavy. Things like regular Space Marines and various other 2-wound models that have decent armor. And in contrast to that, the Scatter Laser has longer range at 36. It has double the amount of shots, but instead of having AP -1 in the Shuriken special rule and damage 2, it has AP 0, damage 1, and no special abilities. So right off the bat, it kind of seems like the Scatter Laser is relegated to light infantry duties, so taking out 1-wound models, very light infantry with barely any armor. But looks can be kind of deceiving, especially in this case. So what a lot of people don't realize is when they're comparing the two weapons, the Scatter Laser actually has double the amount of shots, which in some ways makes up for the lack of AP and damage as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the math, and I think the results will surprise some of you. So for our comparison today, we are only going to be looking at the basic Space Marine. And what I mean by that is mech equivalent with the Armor of Contempt special rule. And first, we're going to be looking at one that is not receiving the benefits of cover. So it's going to have no cover. It's going to have 2 wounds, which in theory should favor the Shuriken Cannon heavily, right? And we're going to be looking at something with, of course, a 3+ save. So when looking at what the Scatter Laser can do, the math is pretty simple here. One Scatter Laser with 6 shots is going to get 4 hits. It's going to get 2.68 wounds, and it's going to deal about 0.8844 wounds dealt. So that means the wounds that actually get through armor, it's going to be almost 1. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Well, how can you get 0.8844 wounds, right? Of course you can't. It's either going to be 1 wound or nothing. But this basically means that we can pretty reliably say that most of the time, at least 9 times out of 10, a single Scatter Laser is going to at least deal 1 wound to a mech equivalent enemy. In contrast, when we compare that with the Shuriken Cannon, it's getting 3 shots, 2 are going to be hits, 1.32 are going to be wounds caused, and of course, it is going to deal 0.8712 wounds, and that's what's going to go through. So of course, against 1 wound targets, this would be much less efficient. It'd be basically half that. We are accounting for the damage in this calculation. But right off the bat, not accounting for the Shuriken proc, the wounds dealt is actually less. Yeah, that's right. On average, the wounds dealt from a Shuriken Cannon is less than that of a Scatter Laser before we account for the Shuriken Cannon proc. And again, the Shuriken Cannon proc is going to slightly increase the damage, and I'm not really sure how much it's going to increase it by, to be honest with you. But I'm sure there's a calculation for it. It's just that basically what's going to happen is there's going to be a 16% chance that you're going to be doing 33% more damage. So if you take 0.8712, you multiply that by 33%, add it to the total, you'll get kind of the damage you would be looking at if you scored a 6 to wound, basically. So you're going to get a lot more wounds, obviously, if you roll those 6s. But the thing is they're not going to happen very often. Shuriken Cannons don't have a lot of shots innately, except in big groups, so you're not going to get many of these. And in fact, when you are rolling against enemy units, it's going to pretty much require you to have 3 Shuriken Cannons to get even 1 proc without anything. So without Guide or Doom, you're probably going to only get 1 proc of the Shuriken special rule. So what does this exactly mean for the results against mech targets with Armor of Contempt, no cover, and 2 wounds? Well, it basically means that the slight edge is going to still go to the Shuriken Cannon because of the Shuriken ability, so which gives extra AP. However, here's the thing. The difference is very minimal. There's not a lot of mathematical difference between the Scatter Laser and the Shuriken Cannon against these targets. And what's extra surprising is the Shuriken Cannon also, again, has damage too. The Shuriken Cannon is kind of more designed towards being able to kill these types of targets. So it's very surprising that the Shuriken Cannon is actually so close to the Scatter Laser when calculating damage against Space Marines. So many of you may look at that and say, yeah, well, that's true, Proxy Hammer, but what if they're going to be in cover? A lot of times Space Marine units are hugging light cover and they're getting extra armor from it. So surely the Shuriken proc is going to be more effective in that case. And yes, you may be right on that, but let's go ahead and do the math on it. So what if the target is in cover? So let's take a look at a mech equivalent enemy with Armor of Contempt, light cover, and 2 wounds. So the Scatter Laser is going to have pretty much the same thing, 6 shots, 4 hits, 2.68 wounds caused, but it's going to be about half the wounds dealt because, again, you're going to be going against a 2+ save instead of a 3+. So you're only going to be dealing 0.4288 wounds that are actually going to go through armor. And if we look at the Shuriken Cannon, we're getting basically the same hits, the same wounds, but the wounds dealt is going to be 0.4224. And against, of course, 1 wound targets, it's going to be half that. So it's going to only be 0.2112. However, we are going against a 2 wound target, so we're going to be dealing that amount of damage. And again, like last time, this is not accounting for the Shuriken proc, which does slightly increase the damage of the Shuriken Cannon. So what are the results? The results are that, again, you're basically getting the same math behind it. A slight edge will go to the Shuriken Cannon, again, because of the Shuriken proc, but there's not a lot of difference between the wounds dealt by the Shuriken Cannon and the wounds dealt by the Scatter Laser. They're almost exactly the same. Now, there is one thing I want to point out, which is because of the Shuriken Cannon's damage too, in a real game scenario, either you're going to kill a Space Marine or you're not going to kill anything. So you're not going to be doing what the Scatter Laser is doing, which is basically just plunk a wound off of a Space Marine. With the Shuriken Cannon, you're either going to be killing one or not killing anything at all. So that is an important thing to note. But again, it is important to note here that the Scatter Laser, which is primarily a light anti-infantry weapon, is comparing so favorably against a unit, mech equivalent enemies, that the Shuriken Cannon is supposed to be hands down better against, right? The Scatter Laser is not really supposed to be able to deal with mech equivalents as well as the Shuriken Cannon, and here we see that without the Shuriken proc, it's basically dead even in terms of damage. So when not accounting for the Shuriken proc, the Scatter Laser even beats out the Shuriken Cannon a little bit mathematically. Of course, when we do factor in that Shuriken proc, it changes a little bit, but not by much. So our last test is going to be against a Terminator equivalent. So what if the target is a Terminator in light cover? So we're going heavy armor here. We're going a Terminator in light cover. So basically with Armor of Contempt, that's going to give the Terminator a lot of toughness, especially against AP weapons. So yeah, let's go ahead and see how both weapons fare. So what's interesting about the scatter laser is the scatter laser does exactly the same amount of damage against a Terminator in light cover as it would a regular Space Marine in light cover. So you're getting 6 shots, 4 are going to hit, 2.68 wounds are going to be caused, and 0.4288 wounds are going to be dealt. And if we look at the Shuriken Cannon, it's basically going to be doing the same damage base, but the key here is that when you get the Shuriken proc against a Terminator equivalent in light cover, you're actually going to be doing about 16% less damage because a Terminator in light cover will be getting a 3+ save. Remember, Terminators have Armor of Contempt, a 2+ base save, and light cover giving them +1. So, also, Terminators do have wounds 3, so damage 2 weapons are already going to be a little bit less efficient against those models because there'll be wounds wasted along the way. Remember, damage doesn't carry over typically. So if you have a Space Marine Terminator with 1 wound left and you shoot a Shuriken Cannon at it, you can only deal 1 wound total. You can't, well, let me just put it this way, that extra wound wouldn't carry over to the next Terminator. So the results against a Terminator equivalent with a 2+ save, Armor of Contempt, light cover, and 3 wounds basically amounts to still an extremely slight edge to the Shuriken Cannon because of the Shuriken proc. So a lot of you are thinking, well, that settles it, right? Shuriken Cannons are better against heavy infantry. So we should be taking Shuriken Cannons if we want to deal with things like Space Marines and Terminators. And yes, in most cases, you would be correct. In general, against the types of enemies I listed in this video, the Shuriken Cannon is going to be ever so slightly more effective. And it really should be, right? Because it is designed to kill heavier infantry. However, is the slight difference in damage enough to justify taking a Shuriken Cannon over a scatter laser in most cases when the scatter laser has a lot of other things going for it? And honestly, in my opinion, I don't think so. I don't think it's enough, and here's why. So my argument as to why the scatter laser is the better choice in non-Hail of Doom lists is this, and just a quick disclaimer real quick, right? In Hail of Doom lists, and I know some of you might be thinking, well, in Hail of Doom, Shuriken Cannons are so much better. Yes, they are, because, they're Shuriken weapons. Any Shuriken weapon is always going to be able to outperform any other weapon of its class in a Hail of Doom list. It's just how the list works. It's just how the army trait works, right? It basically puts Shuriken weapons on steroids here. But in all other types of lists, so whether you're playing Uthway, whether you're playing Iyanden, Alatok, the Far-Flung Craftworlds, non-HOD, basically, here are the reasons why I think the scatter laser is the better choice in most cases. So, 1, the scatter laser has a lot better range. It may not seem like it, 12 inches may not seem like that much, but with Eldar units, you really want to keep your distance where possible, especially on squishy units, and having that better range can give you a little bit more flexibility in when and where you engage enemies. The scatter laser is also slightly cheaper in most cases by about 5 points. Shuriken Cannons are usually about 5 points more than the scatter laser. Scatter laser is free on most vehicles and stuff like that. The scatter laser doesn't fall off in damage against -1 damage effects. Now, this is huge. Things like Plague Marines, the new Leagues of Votann Hearthguard, Wraith units, if you're playing other Eldar armies, etc., all have -1 damage effects. And Shuriken Cannons, let me just put it this way, their viability against targets with that special rule goes down the toilet. Shuriken Cannons are not good against any kind of unit with that -1 damage effect. So scatter lasers, their effectiveness does not fall off against those types of enemies. Scatter lasers also don't fall off in efficiency versus odd wound numbers. So you're never going to have wasted wounds with the scatter laser. So models with 1, 3, and 5 wounds, for example, there's going to be no overkill, and there's basically going to be no wasted wounds from carried over damage. Also, scatter lasers do not care about invulnerable or demonic saves because guess what? They don't have AP. So one of the biggest problems with the Shuriken Cannon, especially against some of the new armies, is that things like demons either have a demonic save, which can't be modified by AP, or you're going against something with a lot of invulnerable saves. So things like Khorne Bloodletters are going to be shredded much more easily to scatter lasers than they ever would be to Shuriken Cannons, because scatter lasers are going to have more attacks, and basically, yeah, it's still going to be the same save either way, right? The AP doesn't matter. And especially when you consider that the scatter laser's strengths make it really strong against some of the most competitive armies out there, you can really start seeing the value of the scatter laser. I mean, think about it for a second. Chaos Demons, Leagues of Votann, Tyranids, Sisters of Battle, the upcoming Imperial Guard, Necrons, right? All of those armies have one or more of the listed vulnerabilities of the Shuriken Cannon. Think about it for a second. A lot of those armies either have -1 damage effects, single wound models, and or invulnerable or demonic saves that Shuriken Cannons are going to have a lot of trouble going up against. So for all of those reasons, I really do believe that the scatter laser has a distinctive advantage when being taken in all-comers lists against the current meta and also the armies that Craftworld Eldar have trouble against the most. So again, in conclusion, I think that against the toughest matchups for Craftworld Eldar, the scatter laser produces consistently more wounds for a cheaper cost and at a greater range. And with all the new ways enemies have of ignoring or negating AP, the Shuriken Cannon, in my opinion, is quickly becoming less of a general purpose weapon and is much less effective against a vast majority of factions, especially those that are on the competitive tip of the iceberg when it comes to tournaments and things like that. Armies like Sisters of Battle, again, Necrons, Tyranids, all of those armies are much more susceptible to scatter laser fire than they would be normally to Shuriken Cannons. So the next time you're building a list and you're not using Hail of Doom, consider swapping out some of your Shuriken Cannons for scatter lasers and seeing how those work out for you. I think you'll be a little bit surprised at the results. And just a quick thing, just to let you guys go, I know that the powers Guide and Doom do affect the amount of Shuriken procs that you might get in any given role. So let's say you have a big unit of, maybe Shuriken Cannon jet bikes and you have Guide and Doom on them. Yes, they're going to probably get more Shuriken procs, but again, you're also investing so many more points and resources into it as well. So you might also consider that the next time you think about what weapons you're choosing on your models. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Leave some comments. What do you guys think about this? This was something that, I was thinking about for a while, and I want to hear you guys' take on it. What do you guys think? Scatter lasers or Shuriken Cannons, and why? Let me know. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. And if there's something that I got wrong in the video, please do let me know. I know my math hammer isn't exactly perfect, so if I did get something wrong, give me a shout out. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. We have a couple more videos coming out this week. I plan to do a video on the Yvrain and Warlock combination. Hopefully that'll be out not tomorrow, but maybe Friday. I'm hoping for Friday at least. And I also have a couple of other videos coming out that I'll update you on later this week. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I'll see you later. Peace out.